Thank you. Good afternoon. So I want to talk about the ever-present topic of gender norms that we have been talking about for the last couple of days, and the power of communities versus changing structural factors that surround communities for changing gender norms. Of course, eventually gender norms have to change in communities because that's where they are practiced. But many of us who work with communities through behavioral change interventions, social information interventions, although we understand the power of those interventions, we also don't acknowledge the limitations. And I want to talk a little bit about the limitations of those interventions, especially as two of my colleagues, Priya Nanda and Avni Amin, have published a paper with me in the Journal of Adolescent Health looking at the limitations of these interventions and considering alternatives. The limitations come in a number of forms. So how many of us have had a situation where we have talked to communities and individuals and given messaging about thinking about gender differently, behaving differently with regard to girls, and find out that our message somehow got distorted? I was in Ghana recently where UNICEF and UNFPA were doing an intervention on life skills and community behavioral change around adolescent pregnancies, child marriage, adolescent girl empowerment. And what was shocking to me was that when we talked to the girls, they had adopted this messaging into the importance of virginity. And that was not the purpose of the messaging that was being given to them, but within their social circle, that was the adaptation that they had made. Another challenge that we see with giving only messaging and information to change people's thinking and mindsets is that sometimes we are successful in changing people's mindsets. So we convince parents that girls should go to school. We convince girls that they are empowered and should have a voice. But then we don't accompany that with systems where they can practice those things. So I was in Nepal last year where we were in a community, and these girls were amazing. When they talked to us, they had been through this great program. Their mothers were totally with them. Their fathers were totally with them. But the nearest school for these girls was 6 kilometers away, and it was rainy season. There was no transportation. There was no way for them to get there. And the biggest concern for the moms was not the empowerment of girls, but how to have bread in the household. The community was so poor that the moms came to us and said, can we please have sewing machines, and can you forget about this program? Another limitation of these kinds of programs often is that they get sabotaged. We always talk about bringing community leaders, religious leaders, faith leaders along, but we forget that communities are not benign, and these norms have underlying power structures. And it's precisely these community leaders and these faith leaders who often are enforcers of these norms. So today we heard a story in one of the child marriage sessions I was in, where this young girl who got married kept wanting to run away, and this man who was very powerful in the community that she was married to literally broke her legs. So we're talking about very nasty, brutal sanctions that happen to people who try to break the norms, and especially women and girls who try to break the norms. So going from sort of understanding some of the limitations and the fact that there's power structure underlying these gender norms, what are some ways that we can think bigger? And that's, again, another limitation of trying to change norms, community by community, individual by individual. We go in one community, we convince these people, but then what after we leave, what happens? How many communities are we going to convince? How many years is it going to take? It's not surprising it'll take 200 years for gender equality to change if we go community by community. So I want to give a couple of examples of how we can think bigger, be more ambitious, and work faster. One type of norm we're trying to change is girls going to school, not getting married early, and experiencing violence in schools. And West Africa is a very interesting case of this. Over 50% of teachers in West African schools at the primary level are male. And that is a very unique situation because in vast majority of the world, primary school teachers are female, 99%, 98%. But those are important jobs. And one of the reasons why there's sexual violence in schools is male teachers are taking advantage of female students. There are not enough educated women to become teachers. And so we need to address the teaching system and the power in the teaching system and have very clear targets in the West African countries where we say we're going to bring within X number of years a ratio of female to male teachers up to, let's say, 70%. Now that has enormous benefits, not just by giving women jobs in the teaching profession, not only giving role models to young women, but also preventing sexual violence in schools. That's the kind of change we need that has multiple benefits from doing one intervention rather than doing 10 interventions to have one benefit. Similarly, we can have this kind of power in the health system. Community health workers are expected to change norms, go talk to people about better maternal health, about adolescent health, about children's well-being, and change norms around I don't know how many things. But in a vast majority of the world, community health workers are, again, female, and they get paid very little. Okay, they get paid very little, and we are not professionalizing them and rewarding them the way that they need. So we can address the health system to really bring up the professionalization of community health workers and have change at scale. So I'd like us to really think bigger, bolder, better in trying to change gender norms. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I didn't want to interrupt your think bigger because I think thinking local but also thinking bigger are really two very important things that we have to consider when we're talking about change. So now you get the final question to tell everyone how will you use your power going forward?
I think my power going forward has to, because I come from a research background, is to provide the data for this type of change, this magnitude of the change that we need to change powerful systems in health, education, transportation, infrastructure, to think big.
Thank you, Anju.